1. Fear and Hope in year 1000. When people in Europe approached the year 1000, they did not see it as just another number on the calendar. To many, it felt like a sacred turning point, the very edge of existence. For centuries, monks had copied lines from holy books warning of the end of time, and preachers spoke of strange signs in the sky, storms that felt like divine anger, and plagues that seemed like punishment. Villagers who lived their lives close to the soil and the rhythms of nature listened to these stories with heavy hearts. Around the fire at night, as wind pressed against their wooden homes, whispers of judgment spread like shadows. The year 999 seemed to carry unbearable weight, and as the new year drew near, fear grew with every sunrise. Yet not all were consumed by dread. Some hoped that if the end came, it would be the beginning of paradise, where hunger and cold would vanish forever. On the night the year turned, candles burned in monasteries, bells rang in valleys, and prayers filled the air. And then, quietly, the sun rose. Life continued. Relief spread like warmth after winter frost, and many felt that they had been given not an end, but a new beginning. To the life of an ordinary peasant, to truly understand the year 1000, we must imagine the daily life of most Europeans who were peasants tied to the land. Their days began with the crowing of roosters, their hands rough from plowing, sowing, and harvesting. Houses were small, built of wood and mud, with smoke curling through thatched roofs. Meals were simple: bread, porridge, perhaps cheese or vegetables, meat only on rare occasions. Life was shaped by the seasons. In summer, the fields demanded endless labor. In winter, the family huddled for warmth, mending tools and telling stories. Work was hard, but community bound people together. Village life meant shared wells, shared fears, and shared celebrations, especially feast days when the church bells called everyone to gather. For many, the idea of the world ending was terrifying, but for others, it was simply part of the rhythm of existence, no more distant than the next storm or the next harvest. 3. Church and faith. The church was the heart of Europe in the year 1000. Its stone walls offered safety and meaning. Its priests explained the mysteries of life and death. In monasteries, monks rose before dawn to chant, their voices echoing through cold halls lit by flickering oil lamps. They copied sacred texts with careful hands, preserving knowledge when so much of the world was illiterate. To the ordinary villager, the church was more than faith, it was the calendar itself, marking holy days, fasts, and festivals. People believed that heaven and hell were close, just beyond the veil of life, and priests reminded them constantly that every action counted in eternity. The turn of the millennium was therefore not just a date, was a spiritual test. Would Christ return? Would the final judgment arrive? When the year 1000 passed quietly, many believed it was a sign of mercy, and devotion deepened. The church grew stronger, shaping the minds and hearts of Europe for centuries to come. 4. Coronation of Stephen I. One of the most symbolic events of this new age took place on Christmas Day, in the very year 1000. In Hungary, Stephen I was crowned as the first Christian king. Before this moment, the Hungarian tribes had been seen as outsiders, fierce horsemen who threatened Europe's borders. But now, with the blessing of the Pope, Hungary became a recognized Christian kingdom. The ceremony was filled with meaning. Candles glowed in the winter darkness, nobles stood in silence, and Stephen bowed his head as the crown touched him. For his people, this was more than politics. It was the birth of a nation with a new identity tied to the greater community of Europe. It showed that even in a world of fear, something new could begin, rooted in faith and hope. Hungary's transformation marked the wider changes happening across the continent, where tribes became kingdoms and kingdoms became part of a shared story. 5. France and Western Europe. While Hungary found its crown, Western Europe was slowly changing as well. In France and the lands around it, small villages were becoming marketplaces. Merchants traded salt, grain, and cloth, and people gathered for fairs where news and stories spread. Castles rose on hills, built not only for defense but as signs of power. Inside their walls, lords and knights held court, bound to their peasants by duty and to their kings by loyalty. This was the beginning of feudal society, a system that would dominate Europe for centuries. The fears of the millennium gave way to practical life, farming, trade, building, and surviving. Stone churches began to appear, their towers reaching toward heaven, their bells marking the hours. For those who lived then, the year 1000 was not the end of time, it was the slow start of a new era, when Europe would begin to grow and organize itself in ways that shaped the centuries ahead. 6. The North and the end of the Viking Age. Far to the north, the story was different. The Vikings, whose raids had terrified Europe for generations, were changing. By the year 1000, many of them had begun to settle, turning from warriors into farmers and traders. Some accepted Christianity, building churches where once they had worshipped their old gods, yet the spirit of adventure had not vanished. Around this time, Leif Erikson set sail westward, reaching a land his people called Vinland, which today we believe was part of North America. Though their settlement did not last, it showed that the world was wider than most Europeans imagined. The year 1000 was, in many ways, the closing of the Viking Age and the opening of something new, one age of exploration, of contact, of transformation. For Europe, this shift meant safety, but it also meant that new horizons were waiting beyond the sea. 7. Conclusion of the introduction. The year 1000 in Europe was therefore not an ending but a beginning. Fear of apocalypse gave way to relief, and relief gave birth to growth. Villages continued their work, churches grew in power, kingdoms formed, and the north quieted as the Vikings changed their ways. To those who lived then, the year 1000 was a mystery, a shadow, a hope, and finally, a dawn. Today we look back and see it as a symbolic moment when the past and future touched hands. It reminds us that even when fear seems overwhelming, life continues, history unfolds, and new chapters begin. For the people of that time, survival was enough. For us, their story is a window into a world both distant and familiar, where humanity faced the unknown with courage, faith, and quiet resilience. 8. Famine, disease, and natural disasters. Life around the year 1000 was fragile. Harvests decided everything. A good summer meant bread for winter, but too much rain or too little sun could bring hunger. Grain was the lifeline, yet it spoiled easily, and if rot spread through the stores, famine followed. People remembered the lean years with fear, for hunger meant more than empty stomachs. Sit meant families torn apart, theft, wandering beggars, and sometimes death. Alongside hunger came disease. Illnesses moved quickly through villages, carried by dirty water or poor food. Without doctors, people turned to charms, herbs, and prayers. Sometimes priests led processions through fields, asking heaven for mercy. At night, lightning storms felt like signs of divine anger, while floods or fires destroyed what little people had. To us, natural disasters may be explained by science, but to them, each misfortune carried spiritual meaning. The year 1000, in their minds, could have been the moment when such disasters gathered into the final punishment. When that moment passed without destruction, it was as if life had been returned to them as a gift. 9. The role of women in society and family. In villages and towns, women carried the rhythm of daily life. A peasant woman woke before dawn, lit the fire, baked bread, cared for children, milked animals, and worked the fields beside her husband. Her labor was invisible to chroniclers, but without her, survival would have been impossible. In noble families, women held different roles, but still carried heavy responsibilities. A lady of a castle might oversee servants, manage stores of grain, and keep accounts, while her husband rode to war. Some women, especially widows, even controlled lands in their own right, though such cases were rare. In the church, nuns devoted themselves to prayer and service, while a few powerful abbesses commanded great respect. Yet for most women, life was bound by duty, family, and faith. Around the year 1000, the image of the Virgin Mary grew in importance, offering an ideal of purity and motherhood that shaped expectations for centuries. Though their voices are rarely heard in the records, women formed the heart of society, enduring the same fears and hopes as men in the shadow of the new millennium. 10. Though most people never traveled far from their birthplace, roads and rivers still carried movement across Europe. Merchants loaded carts with salt, wool, and wine, leading them along muddy tracks where brigands lurked in the forests. Pilgrims walked great distances to reach holy sites, carrying staffs and wearing simple cloaks. For them, the journey itself was a prayer, a way of preparing for eternity. Some roads led to Rome, the eternal city, while others stretched to Santiago de Compostela in Spain, where the shrine of St. James was beginning to draw visitors from distant lands. Along these routes, inns, markets, and tiny chapels appeared, bringing life to otherwise empty stretches. Traders from the Mediterranean brought spices and fine cloth, while northern merchants offered furs and timber. Though the scale was small compared to later centuries, the year 1000 was already weaving Europe together with threads of trade and devotion. Every step on those dusty paths showed that even in an age of fear, people longed to move, to meet, and to hope. 11. Wars and conflicts of nobles. The Europe of the year 1000 was not peaceful. Kings struggled to keep their nobles loyal, and nobles fought one another for land, honor, and inheritance. Castles dotted the landscape, their towers not only symbols of pride, but also fortresses of war. Peasants often suffered most, caught between rival lords. When horsemen rode out with swords and torches, villages could be burned in hours, leaving families homeless. Yet out of this violence grew the bonds of feudalism. Lords promised protection in exchange for service, and knights swore oaths to their masters. The Church tried to soften the brutality by proclaiming the peace of God and the truths of God, movements that limited when and against whom knights could fight. These were small beginnings, but they showed that even in the turmoil of the year 1000, voices rose calling for mercy. War was constant, but so was the longing for peace. It was a world where strength and faith met in uneasy balance. 12. Monks and scriptoria, preserving knowledge. In an age when few could read or write, monasteries were islands of learning. Within their stone walls, monks spent long hours bent over parchment, copying words with careful strokes of ink. Each book was precious, requiring months or even years of work. Candles burned low as monks decorated letters with gold leaf and bright colors, turning texts into treasures. These books preserved not only religious writings but also ancient knowledge from Rome and Greece. In the silence of the cloister, history, philosophy, and science were kept alive. The year 1000 might have felt like the end of the world outside. But within the scriptoria, the work continued calmly, as if time itself had no hold. The patience of these monks gave future generations the wisdom of the past. Without them, much of what we know today might have vanished into darkness. Their quiet labor, invisible to most of their contemporaries, was one of the great gifts of this era. 13. Symbolism of church bells and holidays. The rhythm of life in Europe around the year 1000 was not set by clocks, but by bells. Each village church had its bell, and when it rang, people gathered for prayer, for work, or for warning. The sound traveled across fields and forests, binding communities together. Feast days brought color to otherwise harsh lives. At Christmas, candles lit the darkness of winter, and families shared what little they had. At Easter, processions filled the streets with singing, and flowers decorated the altars. Saints' days punctuated the year, offering both spiritual comfort and a reason for celebration. To the people, these moments were reminders that time was not only a burden of labor, but also a journey toward eternity. The bells that rang on the night of December 31st, 999, carried more meaning than ever before. Each peal could have been the last. When the year 1000 arrived and the bells continued as always, hope replaced fear. Their echo became the music of survival. 14. Imagining the future after the year 1000. After the year 1000 passed safely, people began to wonder not only about survival, but about the future. Chroniclers wrote of signs that perhaps a new age of faith was dawning. Farmers returned to their fields with renewed energy. Merchants dared to travel farther, and rulers dreamed of stronger kingdoms. The fear of sudden judgment had softened into curiosity about what lay ahead. Some believed the world was entering an age of grace, 1,000 years of peace before the final end. Others simply saw that life went on, children were born, harvests returned, and seasons continued their eternal cycle. In the imagination of the people, the year 1000 became a symbol, not the end, but a reminder that time itself was a gift. For us today, their relief feels distant, yet familiar. We too live with fears of endings and hopes for beginnings. Their story shows that humanity always looks beyond the horizon, even when shadows fall across the present. 15. Navigational skills. By the year 1000, the Vikings had perfected the art of navigating the treacherous North Atlantic, a skill that was both practical and almost magical in its precision. They did not rely on modern instruments, but on a combination of natural signs, accumulated knowledge, and keen observation. The position of the sun during the day and the stars at night provided guidance, while the color of the ocean and the flight patterns of birds signaled the proximity of land. Experienced navigators memorized coastlines, islands, and seasonal changes in the sea, which allowed them to plan voyages of hundreds of miles with remarkable accuracy. Longships, the hallmark of Viking ingenuity, were not only fast and durable, but also capable of sailing in shallow waters, enabling landings along rivers and fjords. These skills turned a journey into Vinland from a gamble into a calculated expedition. Beyond technical ability, Viking navigation required courage and confidence, as sailors faced storms, unpredictable currents, and weeks without sight of land. Each successful voyage was a testament to their mastery of nature and human ingenuity, bridging the known world of Europe with the unknown landscapes of North America, and proving that determination and skill could turn exploration into survival. 16. The importance of storytelling. Storytelling in Viking culture was more than mere entertainment. It was a vital tool for preserving knowledge, guiding behavior, and connecting generations. The sagas recounted adventures, battles, voyages, and the daily lives of settlers in lands like Vinland by the year 1000. These oral narratives had already developed into a sophisticated form of historical memory, blending myth and reality. They were performed in communal settings, where listeners learned about courage, leadership, morality, and survival. Tales of Leif Erikson's daring crossing, the challenges of navigating the Atlantic, and encounters with the Skrylings inspired awe and offered practical lessons for future explorers. Storytelling also reinforced cultural identity, reminding Norse communities of their shared values and accomplishments. These narratives preserved not only facts about geography and exploration, but also emotional truths, the fear of storms, the exhilaration of discovery, and the struggle to adapt to new environments. By passing down knowledge in this vivid, memorable form, Vikings ensured that their history lived on, teaching resilience, ingenuity, and courage to generations far removed from the original voyages. 17. Environmental awareness. Settlers in Vinland quickly realized that survival depended on understanding and respecting the natural world. The forests, rivers, and coastlines presented both resources and hazards. Timber provided material for building shelters and ships, while rivers teemed with fish that supplemented the settlers' diet. They studied the behavior of animals, noting seasonal migrations and hunting patterns, which informed food-gathering strategies. Plants were carefully tested for edibility, and knowledge of local herbs became crucial for medicinal purposes. The harsh winters demanded careful preparation, storage of food, and strategic use of resources, while the warmer months were spent harvesting and repairing infrastructure. Unlike the familiar landscapes of Greenland or Iceland, Vinland offered new challenges that required adaptation, observation, and experimentation. This environmental awareness was not merely practical. It shaped the settlers' worldview, teaching patience, humility, and respect for the land. Their ability to read the signs of nature determined survival and success, turning a foreign territory into a place where Norse culture could temporarily take root and thrive. 18. Challenges of isolation. Isolation was perhaps the most persistent challenge for the Vikings in Vinland. Settlements were separated by vast distances from Greenland and Iceland, leaving them vulnerable to shortages of food, materials, and communication. Ships could be delayed by storms or ice, and a single failed expedition might mean months without essential supplies. Illnesses, injuries, and natural disasters became critical threats in communities where every individual's contribution mattered. This isolation demanded ingenuity, cooperation, and strict social organization. Every task, from farming and hunting to ship repair, relied on collective effort. Leaders had to make decisions that balanced risk and survival, and families depended on mutual support. Psychological resilience was equally important. Settlers faced weeks without news, limited contact with the wider world, and the constant pressure of an unfamiliar environment. These challenges forged strong, cohesive communities, where the capacity to adapt and endure became as crucial as physical strength or navigational skill. In this sense, isolation shaped the Vikings' approach to exploration, highlighting the interplay between human ingenuity and environmental pressures. 19. Technological innovations. Technological expertise was a cornerstone of Viking success in Vinland. Settlers relied on iron tools for building homes, repairing ships, and crafting weapons, while advanced shipbuilding techniques allowed them to travel long distances safely. Sails provided speed and efficiency on open water, while oars ensured maneuverability in shallow rivers and inlets. Innovations extended beyond ships and tools. Norse communities developed effective storage systems for food, methods for preserving hides and furs, and techniques for constructing insulated homes that could withstand harsh winters. Even small adaptations, like using local materials for building or modifying ship designs for new coastal conditions, made a significant difference. These innovations illustrate the Vikings' pragmatic intelligence and ability to combine inherited knowledge with creative solutions in unfamiliar contexts. Their technological skills were not simply about survival. They represented a mindset of experimentation, resilience, and foresight, ensuring that expeditions could succeed even in the face of uncertainty and danger. 20. Food preservation techniques. Ensuring a stable food supply was vital for survival in Vinland, and Vikings applied sophisticated preservation techniques to withstand long winters. Fish, meat, and dairy products were smoked, salted, or dried, while grains and legumes were stored carefully to prevent spoilage. Seasonal fruits, berries, and herbs were harvested and sometimes fermented to maintain nutrition throughout the colder months. These practices required knowledge, labor, and meticulous organization. Improperly preserved food could lead to starvation or illness, making mastery of these techniques a matter of life and death. Beyond their practical utility, these methods reflected a culture of foresight and planning. Vikings had to anticipate weather, environmental changes, and potential shortages, demonstrating the strategic thinking that allowed small communities to endure in isolated, remote regions. Food preservation was not merely a technical skill. It was a manifestation of resilience, creativity, and the capacity to transform a challenging environment into a livable, even productive home. 21. Interaction with indigenous peoples. Vikings in Vinland inevitably encountered the indigenous peoples of North America, whom the Norse referred to as the Skrælings. These interactions were complex, ranging from trade to conflict. Archaeological evidence and saga narratives suggest that Vikings traded metal tools, cloth, and weapons in exchange for furs, food, and knowledge of the land. However, misunderstandings and competition for resources sometimes led to violent confrontations. By 1000, such interactions were delicate, requiring diplomacy, courage, and strategic thinking. The Vikings had to quickly adapt to unfamiliar customs, languages, and social structures, learning to negotiate or defend themselves when necessary. These encounters highlight the Norse capacity for cultural adaptation and resourcefulness. They also demonstrate that exploration was not merely about discovering new lands, but also about navigating social landscapes, where survival depended on understanding and responding to people as much as the environment. 22. The role of women. Women played crucial, though often underrepresented roles in Vinland. They managed households, preserved food, tended gardens, and assisted in crafting clothing and tools, allowing men to focus on hunting, exploration, and shipbuilding. Their knowledge of medicine, herbal remedies, and childcare was essential for community survival, especially during periods of isolation or illness. Women also contributed to decision-making within families and clans, offering practical insights for navigating daily life in unfamiliar terrain. By observing the natural world, preparing resources, and maintaining social cohesion, they ensured the continuity of culture and survival. These contributions, though less often celebrated in the sagas, reveal that exploration and settlement were collective efforts, dependent on the skills, knowledge, and resilience of every member, regardless of gender. 23. Settlement construction. Building sustainable settlements in Vinland required innovation and adaptation. Vikings constructed homes using timber, sod, and stone, combining familiar Scandinavian techniques with local materials. Houses were designed to withstand harsh winters, with thick walls, insulated roofs, and hearths for heat. Workshops, storage spaces, and defensive structures were also integrated into the settlements, reflecting careful planning and communal effort. Unlike temporary camps, these settlements aimed for semi-permanent habitation, balancing comfort, safety, and resource efficiency. By observing the land, choosing strategic locations near rivers or forests, and using advanced construction methods, the Vikings demonstrated foresight and engineering skill. Settlement construction was more than survival, it was a way to establish a foothold in a new world, translating exploration into tangible presence. 24. Health and medicine. Health in Vinland was a constant concern, as isolation limited access to medical knowledge and supplies. The Vikings relied on herbal remedies, surgical techniques, and careful diet management to treat injuries and illnesses. Knowledge of local plants proved invaluable for pain relief, antiseptics, and nutrition. Communities emphasized hygiene, wound care, and preventive measures to reduce the impact of disease. The harsh environment, physical labor, and exposure to new pathogens made health a daily challenge. By combining inherited medical traditions from Scandinavia with observations of the new environment, settlers could manage risks and maintain relative well-being. This adaptability in health practices reflects the Vikings' resilience and practical intelligence, essential for long-term survival in a remote land. 25. Religious practices and spirituality. Religion shaped Viking life in Vinland, providing structure, meaning, and psychological support. Rituals, prayers, and offerings were performed to seek protection, success in hunting, and safe voyages. Sacred objects, runes, and symbolic gestures reinforced a connection to gods and ancestors. The unfamiliar environment may have heightened spiritual awareness as settlers faced dangers and uncertainties daily. Religious practices also reinforced community bonds, creating shared rituals that united members through belief and tradition. These practices helped cope with isolation, fear, and challenges, reflecting a worldview in which survival was intertwined with faith. Spirituality was both a personal and communal resource, guiding behavior and inspiring courage in a world far from home. 26. Legacy of exploration. The expeditions to Vinland left a lasting legacy that extended far beyond the year 1000. Even if the settlements were temporary, the voyages demonstrated the feasibility of transatlantic travel and inspired future generations. The sagas recorded the exploits of explorers like Leif Erikson, preserving knowledge of geography, navigation, and survival techniques. These stories influenced Norse culture for centuries and contributed to a broader understanding of human exploration. The legacy of Vinland lies not only in physical discoveries, but also in the cultural and intellectual impact of daring to reach unknown lands, showing that curiosity, courage, and skill could expand the boundaries of human experience. 27. Challenges of climate and weather. The climate of Vinland posed constant challenges, with unpredictable storms, cold winters, and sudden changes in weather. Settlers had to read signs in the sky, understand seasonal patterns, and adjust their activities accordingly. Storms could destroy crops, ships, or structures, while harsh winters demanded careful planning. Food preservation and resource management. Adapting to climate meant learning from experience, observing nature, and preparing for worst-case scenarios. These conditions tested physical endurance, mental resilience, and problem-solving skills. The Vikings' ability to survive and navigate such challenges highlights the interplay between human ingenuity and environmental forces, showing that exploration required not just bravery but continuous adaptation. 28. Cultural exchange and long-term impact. Finally, Vinland represents an early example of cultural exchange, where Norse settlers interacted with indigenous peoples, shared technologies, and exchanged ideas. Even brief encounters influenced tools, diet, and knowledge on both sides. The presence of the Vikings in North America, though temporary, demonstrates the interconnectedness of human societies and the potential for knowledge transfer across continents. The long-term impact of these interactions includes not only historical awareness, but also inspiration for exploration and understanding of human adaptability. Vinland stands as a symbol of curiosity, resilience, and the enduring human drive to explore, reminding us that even 1,000 years ago, people sought new horizons and learned from the world around them. 29. Europe on the brink of change. By the year 1000, Europe was a continent in transition, balancing between the remnants of the Carolingian Empire and the rise of new regional powers. Political authority was fragmented, with kings, dukes, and local lords vying for control over lands and resources. The Church played an increasingly central role, guiding moral, legal, and educational frameworks across territories. Feudal structures were solidifying, connecting peasants to landowners in a complex web of obligations and protection. Economies were still largely agrarian, but trade networks were expanding, linking cities and ports across rivers and seas. The climate, social pressures, and the memory of Viking incursions shaped daily life, prompting communities to innovate in defense, agriculture, and governance. Within this environment, Europe was on the cusp of transformation. Localized authority coexisted with overarching religious influence, creating both tension and opportunity. This period set the stage for later expansion, exploration, and cultural growth as societies adapted to shifting political, environmental, and economic realities. 30. Viking influence beyond Scandinavia. By 1000, the impact of Viking activity stretched far beyond the Nordic homelands. Vikings had established trading posts and settlements in Ireland, England, Normandy, and as far east as the Kievan Rus. These interactions spread Norse culture, language, and technology, while facilitating exchanges of goods, ideas, and military strategies. In England, the Danelaw represented a unique blend of Norse and Anglo-Saxon systems, influencing law, customs, and settlements. Similarly, in Normandy, Viking settlers integrated with local populations, eventually producing a lineage that would shape European history, including the Norman conquest of England. Viking ships, navigation techniques, and metallurgical skills were disseminated across regions, enhancing trade and exploration. By connecting distant parts of Europe, Vikings acted as catalysts for cultural and technological exchange, leaving a legacy that persisted long after the initial waves of raiding and settlement. 31. Religious consolidation and conflict. The year 1000 was a critical time for Christianity in Europe, with missionaries spreading faith to Scandinavia, Eastern Europe, and even parts of Russia. Conversion efforts often intertwined with political goals, as rulers sought legitimacy through religious authority. Pagan traditions coexisted uneasily with Christian influence, creating tension but also opportunities for syncretism. Churches and monasteries became centers of learning, record-keeping, and art, preserving knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. Missionary activity required diplomacy, cultural understanding, and sometimes military protection, highlighting the complex relationship between faith and politics. The spread of Christianity influenced daily life, from moral codes to agricultural festivals, reshaping European societies in ways that would reverberate for centuries. 32. Technological and agricultural innovations. By 1000, Europe was slowly emerging from the early medieval stagnation, with innovations improving agriculture, infrastructure, and craftsmanship. The heavy plow allowed more efficient cultivation of heavier soils, while watermills and windmills mechanized tasks previously done by hands. Crop rotation methods improved yields, supporting population growth and urban expansion. Blacksmiths and carpenters advanced metalwork and construction techniques, while shipbuilders refined designs for both trade and warfare. These technological developments were not isolated. They reflected a growing understanding of efficiency, resource management, and problem solving. By combining inherited Roman knowledge with local innovation, European societies created the foundation for long-term stability and future exploration. 33. Urban centers and trade. By 1000, small towns and emerging cities acted as hubs of trade, culture, and political influence. Markets brought together local farmers, craftsmen, and foreign merchants, facilitating exchange of goods such as furs, salt, metalwork, and textiles. River and sea routes connected distant regions, encouraging economic interdependence. Urban centers often grew around castles, monasteries, or ports, combining security, governance, and commerce. These towns became incubators for ideas, crafts, and cultural blending, forming the backbone of later medieval urbanization. Despite their size, they were centers of influence, reflecting the ways humans adapt to and shape economic landscapes, connecting rural production with broader regional networks. 34. The Holy Roman Empire. By the year 1000, the Holy Roman Empire was consolidating under the leadership of the Ottonian dynasty. The empire was a complex patchwork of duchies, bishoprics, and counties, with the emperor seeking to unify diverse peoples under both secular and religious authority. Imperial rule depended heavily on alliances with nobles and the church, creating a delicate balance of power. The emperor's influence extended across Central Europe, but local lords retained significant autonomy, which often led to internal conflicts and power struggles. Administrative structures were evolving, including the appointment of bishops and abbots to key positions, integrating religious leadership with political governance. This fusion of spiritual and temporal power helped maintain order, but also set the stage for disputes between church and state that would shape European politics for centuries. 35. Byzantine Empire. Meanwhile, the Byzantine Empire continued to thrive in the East, preserving classical knowledge, art, and complex administrative systems. By 1000, the empire was experiencing a period of military and cultural strength under the Macedonian dynasty. Trade routes from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea facilitated economic prosperity, while diplomatic relationships with emerging powers in Europe and the Middle East expanded influence. Byzantine culture, including art, architecture, and religious scholarship, had a lasting impact on neighboring regions. The empire also served as a buffer against incursions from nomadic peoples and emerging Islamic powers, maintaining a balance of stability and vigilance. Its sophisticated bureaucracy and wealth contrasted with the fragmented Western kingdoms, highlighting the diversity of political and cultural systems in Europe at the time. 36. Scandinavian kingdoms. In Scandinavia, the year 1000 marked a period of transition from Viking raiding to kingdom building. Norway, Denmark, and Sweden were consolidating into more centralized states under influential kings. Conversion to Christianity was reshaping legal systems, social hierarchies, and international relations. While trade and exploration continued to link Scandinavia with broader Europe, Viking influence still extended through raiding, settlement, and mercenary activity. But the focus was gradually shifting toward governance, diplomacy, and economic development. These kingdoms developed naval power, fortifications, and administrative systems that allowed them to participate actively in European affairs, balancing the legacy of the Viking era with the emerging structures of medieval monarchy. 37. Eastern Europe and Kievan Rus. Eastern Europe was witnessing the rise of Kievan Rus, a federation of Slavic tribes under the leadership of powerful princes. Trade along rivers like the Dnieper and Volga connected this region to Byzantium, Scandinavia, and the Islamic world, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Conversion to Orthodox Christianity under Prince Vladimir I had profound cultural and political consequences, aligning Kievan Rus with Byzantine religious and legal traditions. Cities like Kiev became centers of administration, culture, and commerce, reflecting a fusion of Slavic and Norse influences. This period was crucial in establishing political cohesion and cultural identity, laying the foundation for future states in the region and highlighting the importance of trade, religion, and diplomacy in shaping emerging European powers. 38. Islamic world and intellectual growth. The Islamic world around 1000 was experiencing a golden age of knowledge, science, and trade. The Abbasid Caliphate, although politically fragmented, remained a center of learning, with scholars excelling in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Cities such as Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo were hubs of cultural exchange, connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. Islamic merchants played a key role in global trade networks, distributing goods like spices, textiles, and precious metals. This intellectual and commercial vitality influenced Europe indirectly through translations of scientific texts and the transfer of technologies such as algebra, optics, and advanced irrigation techniques. The year 1000 represents a period where knowledge and trade in the Islamic world had far-reaching impacts, setting the stage for cross-cultural interactions that would shape global development in subsequent centuries. 39. The spread of monasticism. Monasticism continued to shape European society in profound ways. Monasteries were centers of spiritual devotion, education, and manuscript preservation. By 1000, Benedictine and Cluniac reforms were strengthening discipline, promoting scholarship, and expanding networks across Europe. Monks cultivated land, produced food, and provided medical care, playing essential roles in local economies. These communities preserved classical texts, created illuminated manuscripts, and served as hubs for intellectual exchange. Monastic life also encouraged the standardization of liturgy, law, and moral practices, influencing both peasants and nobility. The impact of monasticism extended beyond religion, shaping culture, learning, and social organization at a pivotal moment in European history. 40. Trade routes and economic networks. Trade was expanding significantly by 1000, connecting northern, western, and eastern Europe, as well as linking Europe with the Mediterranean and beyond. Rivers like the Rhine, Danube, and Volga acted as vital arteries for commerce, while emerging market towns became centers of exchange. Goods included furs, grain, wine, metalwork, and luxury items. Merchants and craftsmen formed early guilds, regulating production and trade, while long-distance travel encouraged cultural exchange and technological transfer. Economic networks strengthened political structures by creating wealth, enabling rulers to fund armies, fortifications, and administrative institutions. The growth of trade reflected the increasing sophistication of European society and foreshadowed the commercial expansion of the High Middle Ages. 41. Art, architecture, and cultural expression. By 1000, European art and architecture were evolving, reflecting both religious devotion and regional identity. Romanesque styles began to emerge in churches, characterized by rounded arches, thick walls, and decorative carvings. Manuscripts, illuminated with intricate designs and religious imagery, demonstrated the merging of aesthetic skill with spiritual purpose. Sculpture and metalwork illustrated religious narratives, local legends, and societal values. Cultural expression was not confined to art alone. Music, poetry, and oral storytelling conveyed traditions, history, and moral lessons. These creative efforts helped preserve collective memory and identity in a fragmented political landscape, illustrating that cultural life thrived even in a time of uncertainty and transition. 42. Preparing for the new millennium. As the year 1000 approached, Europeans experienced a mix of anticipation, anxiety, and reflection. Religious interpretations framed the millennium as a moment of spiritual significance, inspiring reform, devotion, and sometimes fear. Political leaders sought stability and legitimacy, emphasizing moral governance and alliances. Communities prepared for survival and prosperity, improving agriculture, fortifications, and social cohesion. This transitional period encouraged innovation, adaptation, and the consolidation of cultural, religious, and economic practices. by looking forward to the new millennium, societies laid foundations that would influence the trajectory of Europe for centuries, blending continuity with change in ways that highlight human resilience and ambition. 43. Maritime exploration and naval power. By the year 1000, maritime exploration was becoming increasingly important across Europe and beyond. The Vikings, having established settlements and trade networks across the North Atlantic, the British Isles, and the Baltic, demonstrated the potential of naval skill and long-distance travel. Their longships, designed for speed and versatility, allowed navigation of rivers and open seas alike, enabling raiding, trading, and colonization. Meanwhile, Mediterranean powers, such as the Italian city-states, began to recognize the economic and strategic importance of maritime trade. Ports like Venice, Genoa, and Amalfi served as critical hubs connecting Europe to North Africa, the Levant, and beyond. Maritime knowledge navigation by stars, understanding tides and currents, and shipbuilding innovations was rapidly expanding. Naval power was no longer just a tool for war. It became an instrument of commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange, laying the groundwork for the eventual age of exploration centuries later. 44. Education and scholarship. The turn of the millennium saw notable growth in education and scholarship, particularly within monastic and cathedral schools. Literacy, though still limited, was spreading among clergy, nobility, and select merchants, enabling the preservation and transmission of knowledge. Monks copied manuscripts, recorded annals, and translated classical texts, including works of philosophy, mathematics, and medicine. Intellectual curiosity was often intertwined with religious devotion, as study was considered a path to understanding God's creation. Scholars began to collect knowledge systematically, laying early foundations for universities and intellectual networks that would flourish in the High Middle Ages. Education was both a spiritual and practical endeavor, equipping leaders, administrators, and clergy with skills to manage lands, negotiate treaties, and interpret law, while also nurturing cultural continuity across generations. 45. Social hierarchies and daily life. Daily life in Europe around 1000 was deeply shaped by social hierarchies. Nobility exercised control over land and legal systems, while peasants worked the soil, providing essential food and labor. Obligations were mutual but heavily weighted toward lords, who offered protection, justice, and the occasional opportunities for mobility. Towns and villages developed distinctive local identities, influenced by trade, religion, and shared labor. Festivals, religious observances, and seasonal cycles structured the year, blending practical and spiritual needs. Craftsmen, merchants, and itinerant traders contributed to the economy, while local disputes and family alliances shaped community dynamics. Despite hardships such as famine, disease, or conflict, these societies cultivated resilience and social cohesion, balancing survival with the desire for stability, order, and cultural expression. 46. Architectural achievements. By 1000, architecture had begun to reflect the evolving priorities and aesthetics of European society. Romanesque structures, characterized by thick stone walls, rounded arches, and robust towers, dominated ecclesiastical buildings. Cathedrals and monasteries were not merely religious centers, they were symbols of political power, cultural identity, and technological skill. Fortifications, including castles and city walls, demonstrated advances in defensive engineering. reflecting the constant need for protection in a fragmented political landscape. Bridges, aqueducts, and public buildings also improved infrastructure, supporting both urban growth and trade. These architectural achievements illustrated human ingenuity, combining functionality with artistry, and leaving a lasting legacy of design principles that would influence construction for centuries. 47. Cultural exchanges and diplomacy. Interactions between distant regions encouraged cultural exchanges and diplomacy. Trade networks, pilgrimages, and political marriages facilitated the flow of ideas, goods, and technologies across Europe, the Middle East, and Northern Africa. Art, literature, and scientific knowledge often traveled along these routes, influencing local customs and practices. Diplomatic missions between rulers sought alliances, peace treaties, and trade privileges, demonstrating the increasing sophistication of medieval political strategy. Cultural exchange was not limited to elites. Merchants, travelers, and religious figures acted as conduits for knowledge and innovation. These connections highlighted a growing awareness of interconnectedness as societies learned from one another and adopted practices that enhanced security, wealth, and cultural richness. 48. Medicine and health. By 1000, medical knowledge in Europe was a combination of inherited classical traditions, folk remedies, and religious approaches. Monastic hospitals provided care for the sick, often blending spiritual guidance with herbal treatments and basic surgical practices. Texts from Greek, Roman, and Islamic scholars were slowly being translated, offering insights into anatomy, pharmacology, and hygiene. While disease remained a constant threat, communities developed strategies for prevention and care, including isolation of contagious individuals, attention to diet, and the use of medicinal herbs. Healing was closely tied to faith, with prayers, relics, and rituals forming an essential part of medical practice. This period laid the groundwork for the eventual integration of empirical observation with scholarly knowledge in later centuries, highlighting the interplay between tradition and innovation in human health. 49. Agriculture and rural economy. Agriculture remained the foundation of European life in 1000, but gradual innovations were transforming the rural economy. The heavy plow allowed cultivation of previously difficult soils, while three-field rotation systems improved yields and sustainability. Villages organized communal labor to manage irrigation, clearing, and planting, fostering collaboration and interdependence. Livestock played a key role, providing not only food, but also labor, clothing, materials, and fertilizer. Surpluses supported trade, population growth, and urban expansion. The rural economy was intertwined with social and political structures, as lords, peasants, and clergy negotiated obligations and rights. These agricultural developments reflected a growing understanding of resource management, environmental adaptation, and the importance of productivity for societal stability and prosperity. 50. Preparing for the future. As Europe approached the second millennium, societies faced both anxiety and hope. Religious interpretations emphasized spiritual preparation, while political leaders sought to secure their territories and legitimacy. Communities invested in fortifications, infrastructure, and education to ensure survival and prosperity. Trade and exploration connected regions more than ever before, fostering economic growth and cultural exchange. The innovations, alliances, and social structures emerging around 1000 would shape the trajectory of Europe for centuries. influencing governance, commerce, religion, and daily life. By looking toward the future while navigating present challenges, societies demonstrated resilience, creativity, and adaptability, setting the stage for the profound transformations of the High Middle Ages and beyond. 51. The role of women in society. By the year 1000, women's roles in European societies were diverse, but often constrained by social hierarchies and expectations. Noble women could wield influence through marriage alliances, managing estates, and sometimes acting as regents in the absence of male rulers. In monastic communities, women had access to education and spiritual authority, often becoming abbesses or scholars, preserving and copying manuscripts. Peasant women contributed significantly to the rural economy, performing agricultural labor, tending livestock, and managing household production. Artisans and merchants' wives sometimes assisted in trade or craftwork, ensuring family survival and prosperity. Despite limitations in formal political power, women exercised influence in family, community, and religious life, shaping daily life, cultural practices, and moral values across generations. 52. Feudal law and justice. The legal landscape around 1000 was heavily shaped by feudal structures. Lords exercised judicial authority over their vassals and peasants, resolving disputes, enforcing obligations, and maintaining order. Local customs coexisted with emerging codified laws, including those influenced by the Church, such as canon law, which addressed moral and religious matters. Trial by ordeal, combat, and oaths were common, reflecting a belief in divine justice. Markets and towns developed their own legal frameworks, establishing guild regulations, property rights, and civic responsibilities. Legal practice was deeply intertwined with social hierarchy, reflecting and reinforcing existing power dynamics. Understanding these systems illuminates how medieval societies balanced authority, responsibility, and morality, while providing mechanisms, albeit imperfect, for dispute resolution and social cohesion. 53. Religion and pilgrimage. Religion dominated both public and private life, providing structure, meaning, and social cohesion. Pilgrimages to sacred sites such as Santiago de Compostela, Rome, or Canterbury were undertaken by nobles and commoners alike, reflecting devotion and seeking spiritual merit. These journeys facilitated cultural exchange, trade, and the dissemination of ideas, as travelers carried stories, relics, and knowledge between regions. Local shrines, monasteries, and cathedrals were centers of worship and social life, hosting festivals, markets, and charitable activities. Religious leaders influenced governance, law, and education, reinforcing the moral and spiritual framework of society. Pilgrimage and religious observance strengthened community bonds while connecting local populations to broader networks of faith and practice across Europe and beyond. 54. Technological innovations. Technological advances around 1000 were subtle but impactful, laying the groundwork for future development. Improvements in agriculture, including the heavy plow, water mills, and better harnessing of draft animals, increased productivity and efficiency. Shipbuilding and navigation techniques enabled longer and safer voyages, expanding trade and exploration. Metalworking and textile production improved, facilitating the creation of tools, weapons, and clothing that supported daily life and commerce. Even small innovations in construction, such as more durable bridges or fortified walls, had lasting effects on society. These technological developments were not isolated. They reflected a culture of observation, adaptation, and problem-solving that allowed communities to thrive in changing economic, environmental, and social conditions. 55. Literature and storytelling. By the year 1000, storytelling and literature were essential tools for preserving culture, history, and moral lessons. Epic poems, chronicles, and religious texts were transmitted orally or in manuscript form, often in monasteries or courts. Tales of heroism, morality, and spiritual devotion entertained and educated audiences, blending history with myth. Bards, minstrels, and scribes played crucial roles in shaping collective memory, passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. The development of written vernacular languages began to complement Latin, making stories and teachings more accessible to broader audiences. Literature was both an artistic expression and a practical means of cultural preservation, providing insight into the values, fears, and aspirations of medieval societies. Around the year 1000, towns and urban centers began to re-emerge after centuries of relative rural dominance. Market towns developed along trade routes, rivers, and crossroads, providing hubs for commerce, craft production, and social interaction. Early urban populations included merchants, artisans, and laborers, creating diverse communities with specialized skills. Towns often operated under charters granted by local lords, establishing self-governance, regulations, and protection. Churches, markets, and guild halls formed the core of urban life, balancing economic activity with religious and social organization. This growth signaled a shift in European society toward more interconnected and economically vibrant communities, laying the foundation for the later expansion of cities during the High Middle Ages. 57. Political fragmentation and consolidation. In Europe, political fragmentation was a defining feature at the turn of the millennium. The collapse of larger empires, such as the Carolingian Empire, left a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and principalities, each striving for legitimacy and control. Local lords exercised significant autonomy, while kings and central authorities attempted to consolidate power through military campaigns, strategic marriages, and alliances with influential nobles. This delicate balance between centralization and decentralization created a political environment marked by shifting loyalties, occasional conflict, and ongoing negotiation of power. In other regions, including the Middle East, India, and China, similar patterns of consolidation occurred, though shaped by different cultural and administrative traditions. The period demonstrates the diversity of governance strategies and the complexity of maintaining authority in societies undergoing profound transition. 58. Trade and economic networks. Economic activity around the year 1000 increasingly relied on expanding trade networks. European merchants connected with Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Baltic markets, exchanging goods such as spices, salt, textiles, and metals. Markets and fairs became not only centers of commerce, but also hubs for cultural exchange and information dissemination. Innovations in currency, credit systems, and accounting facilitated more sophisticated trade practices, gradually transforming local economies into interconnected regional networks. Similarly, trade routes such as the Silk Road and Indian Ocean maritime routes linked Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, promoting the circulation of technologies, religious ideas, and artistic styles. These growing networks highlighted the interdependence of regions and the increasing significance of mobility, specialization, and urban centers in sustaining economic growth. 59. Religious influence and monasticism. Religion continued to dominate social and political life, with the Church serving as both moral authority and mediator in governance. Monastic communities played a central role in preserving knowledge, copying manuscripts, and maintaining education and healthcare within their regions. Monks and nuns also contributed to agricultural innovation, improving local economies while sustaining intellectual continuity. Pilgrimages, religious festivals, and the construction of churches and monasteries facilitated cultural exchange and social cohesion across regions. The Church influenced law, social norms, and political decisions, reinforcing hierarchical structures while providing spiritual guidance. Religion during this period was not only a personal belief system, but a pervasive social institution shaping daily life, political organization, and cultural identity. 60. Cultural expression and artistic achievement. Around the year 1000, cultural expression flourished across architecture, literature, and the arts. Romanesque architecture emerged, with its massive walls, rounded arches, and elaborate decorative motifs reflecting both religious devotion and the assertion of political power. Manuscript illumination combined artistry with intellectual preservation, documenting historical events, religious teachings, and literary narratives. Oral storytelling remained a vital medium for transmitting cultural memory, moral lessons, and heroic tales to diverse audiences. The use of vernacular languages began to complement Latin, broadening access to literature and reinforcing regional identities. Artistic and literary achievements reflected the interconnectedness of spiritual life, political authority, and cultural identity, illustrating the medieval emphasis on both continuity and innovation. 61. Agricultural advancements. Around the year 1000, agriculture underwent significant improvements that transformed medieval economies and society. Innovations such as the heavy plow allowed farmers to cultivate heavier soils in northern Europe, while the three-field crop rotation system increased productivity and reduced soil exhaustion. Watermills and windmills harnessed natural energy to grind grain, press oil, and process other materials, reducing manual labor and boosting efficiency. Draft animals, particularly horses, with improved harnessing techniques, contributed to more effective plowing and transport. These advancements not only ensured better food security, but also supported population growth, the expansion of towns, and the diversification of trades. Agriculture thus formed the backbone of medieval life, reflecting human ingenuity and the capacity to adapt to environmental challenges. 62. Technological innovations. The technological landscape of the year 1000 extended beyond agriculture, affecting construction, craftsmanship, and navigation. Improved metalworking techniques allowed for stronger tools and weapons, while developments in shipbuilding facilitated longer sea voyages and the expansion of trade networks. Innovations in textiles, such as the production of finer wool and the use of looms, enabled the growth of craft industries and urban economies. Bridges, fortifications, and buildings became more durable through advanced construction techniques, supporting both civilian life and military defense. These technological advancements, though often incremental, reflected a culture of observation, problem-solving, and adaptation, laying the groundwork for further developments in later centuries. 63. Education and literacy. Education in the year 1000 was closely linked to religious institutions. Monasteries, cathedral schools, and some noble households provided instruction in reading, writing, and basic arithmetic, often focusing on Latin as the lingua franca of scholarship. The preservation of classical texts, combined with the copying and commentary of religious manuscripts, ensured the continuity of knowledge across generations. Literacy remained limited to clergy, nobility, and select merchants, but it allowed for the documentation of history, legal codes, and administrative records. Educational practices shaped societal elites, reinforced religious and moral values, and contributed to the intellectual foundations that would later support the renaissance of learning in the High Middle Ages. 64. Law and justice systems. Legal systems around the year 1000 reflected the interplay between local customs, feudal authority, and religious influence. Lords and kings held judicial power over their territories, resolving disputes, enforcing obligations, and regulating property rights. Canon law guided moral and religious behavior, complementing secular law in many regions. Trial by ordeal, combat, and oaths were common methods of determining justice, reflecting a belief in divine intervention. Urban centers began developing their own legal frameworks, including guild regulations, market rights, and civic charters. The coexistence of customary, religious, and codified law created a complex system aimed at maintaining social order and balancing authority, accountability, and communal responsibility. 65. Urban development. The growth of towns and early cities marked a significant social and economic shift. Settlements often emerged around markets, trade routes, and fortifications, drawing artisans, merchants, and laborers. Urban populations were diverse, fostering specialized trades, guilds, and social hierarchies. Towns often obtained charters from local lords, granting autonomy in trade regulation, taxation, and legal matters. Churches, marketplaces, and communal spaces formed the social and cultural centers of these settlements. Urban development facilitated economic expansion, cultural exchange, and the rise of civic identity, signaling the increasing importance of non-rural communities in medieval society. 96. Artistic patronage and symbolism. Rulers, religious institutions, and wealthy individuals sponsored artistic endeavors to express authority, piety, and cultural sof. 66. Maritime trade and exploration. Maritime trade played an increasingly vital role in connecting distant regions around the year 1000. Advances in shipbuilding, navigation, and cartography allowed sailors to undertake longer voyages with greater safety and efficiency. Coastal and riverine trade networks facilitated the movement of goods such as salt, metals, textiles, and spices, while also enabling the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. Ports and harbors became hubs of economic activity, attracting merchants, craftsmen, and settlers. Exploration along rivers and seas contributed to the spread of cultural influences and political contacts, gradually shaping the patterns of interaction that would dominate the medieval world. 97. Communication and record-keeping. Efficient communication and meticulous record-keeping were essential for governance, commerce, and culture. Monasteries, courts, and merchants maintained charters, tax records, correspondence, and chronicles. Written documents facilitated legal authority, historical memory, and economic accountability, while literacy and education determined who could participate in these systems. Record-keeping practices in the year 1000 ensured continuity, allowed for strategic planning, and preserved knowledge for future generations. 98. Festivals and social cohesion. Festivals, religious holidays, and communal celebrations reinforced social cohesion and cultural identity. Rituals, music, storytelling, and processions marked the agricultural calendar, commemorated saints, or celebrated political events. Participation created shared experiences, strengthened community bonds, and reinforced moral and social norms. The year 1000 demonstrates how public celebrations served as both entertainment and social glue, uniting disparate members of society under common traditions and values.